50 charter buses taught my HOA neighbor a lesson that one locked gate could have explained for free, and I got to watch the whole thing happen with a cup of coffee in my hand. By 7:40 that morning, the first bus was idling 6 inches from my steel gate, 49 more stacked behind it clear back to the county road, and the man who caused all of it was standing at my fence line with his phone glued to his ear like panic itself had started billing by the minute. I've seen expensive mistakes before, but I had never seen one stretch that long down a Montana road. My name's Edward Call. I'm 51, and before I bought my place outside Bozeman and stepped away from that life, I spent 23 years working event logistics and large venue operations, which means I know exactly what a well-run event looks like. And I definitely know what a disaster looks like when it's still pretending to be organized. These days I run a small cattle operation, lease out part of my hay ground to a neighboring farmer, and keep mostly to myself. I like the quiet. I like the routine. I like waking up and seeing the Bridger Range off my porch and not having to hear anyone use the phrase signature event. I own 114 acres in Gallatin County, Rolling Grass Creek water in the lower section, a line of lodgepole pines up north, and a gravel road I built myself across the southern pasture back in 2019. That road matters here. It runs about 9/10 of a mile through my land and ends at a gate that connects near a Forest Service access point. It is private. It is mine. I paid for it. I maintain it. And there has never been one confusing inch about that. Next to my property sits a development called Ridgemont Valley, a few hundred acres of newer homes, clubhouse, common areas, all the usual stuff. For the first few years, their HOA was run by sane people. Not my favorite species maybe, but sane. They handled their neighborhood, I handled my ranch, and we all managed the rare miracle of leaving each other alone. Then the board changed over and a man named Stuart Briggs became president. You know the type. Fast talker. Compact little bundle of ambition. The kind of guy who walks into a room already acting like he's halfway through a TED Talk nobody asked for. He'd made money in commercial real estate down in Denver, then moved to Montana with that very specific energy some people bring here, like the whole state is a blank whiteboard waiting for their marker. He didn't look at that HOA like it was a neighborhood to manage. He looked at it like a stage. Within a year, he tripled the events budget through a summer festival, got some local press, and started bragging about creating a destination community, which to me is usually a warning sign that somebody's about to spend a lot of other people's money trying to hear applause. His grand idea for fall was what he called an autumn heritage tour. Charter buses, scenic route, working farms, ranch views, historic countryside, all that packaged up country life people like to admire through a clean bus window. He booked 50 buses through a charter company in Bozeman, sold something like 2,000 tickets between residents, and the public pushed it online, pushed it in local media, and apparently convinced himself he was producing the social event of the season. There was just one problem. Part of his curated route ran directly across my private road. He never called me, never knocked on my door, never sent a letter, never even had the basic decency to ask the question a fifth grader would ask before cutting through somebody else's yard. I found out 11 days before the event because a woman named Patricia Hensley, who lived in Ridgemont Valley, called me sounding cheerful as a church social and asked if I was excited to have so many visitors coming through my property. She'd bought a ticket. She'd read the event page. She thought it was wonderful I was participating. I told her no, ma'am, I was not participating, mostly because nobody had bothered to tell me I was. She sent me the page within minutes. I sat there at my kitchen table and read the whole thing twice. There it was, plain as day, a scenic private ranch road crossing with a photograph taken from my southern pasture looking toward the creek and the mountains. My land, my road, my view, my gate, used like it was some free little postcard insert for Stuart's big idea. That kind of thing gives you a strange calm. Not the calm where you forgive people, the calm where everything suddenly gets simple. I called my attorney, Renata Shaw, a land use lawyer in Bozeman who had helped with the property purchase years earlier. I sent her the link, explained what was going on, and she called me back inside the hour. She didn't need long. She said the situation was about as clear as these things ever get. My road was private property. The gate at the far end was on my land. There was no access, right? No implied permission, no gray area. On top of that, using a photo of my property and promotional materials without consent was its own separate problem. And if anything had happened to those people on my land, the liability mess would have been ugly in a hurry. Then she asked how I wanted to handle it. I told her I saw two paths. One, we send a cease and desist right away, make them reroute, take down the materials, handle it neatly. Two, we say nothing, let Stuart drive his whole bright, shiny circus right up to my locked gate and document every second of it. She went quiet for a moment. Then she said the first option was cleaner legally. I told her I knew that. But I also told her something else. A man who steals your view for marketing maps 50 buses across your land without asking, and assumes he can fix it later with charm or pressure, is a man who probably won't learn a thing from a polite letter. Some people don't understand boundaries until they hit one made of steel. Renata didn't argue. She just said if I chose the second option, I had to do it right. Document everything. Don't threaten, don't interfere, don't play games. Just exercise my right to control access to my own property and let the facts do the talking. That was exactly my plan. For the next 10 days, I got ready quietly. I had a locksmith install a new heavy-duty padlock on the southern gate where my gravel road began. I took photos. I kept both keys on me. I set up trail cameras at 2 angles so I'd have clean footage of whatever happened there. I saved screenshots of the event page, the route description, the ticket prices, the attendance projections, the photo of my land, all of it. I sent everything to Renata with a written timeline. She prepared a formal demand package to file after the event. I didn't tell the HOA. I didn't call Stuart. I didn't post online. I just let him keep building his own trap. The morning of the tour was one of those clear October Saturdays Montana does almost unfairly well. Sharp light, cold air mountains looking close enough to touch. I was on my porch at 6:30 with coffee when I heard the first bus on the county road. By 7, the lead bus had turned toward my pasture entrance. By 7:15, it was at the gate. By 7:40, all 50 buses were backed up behind it, a full parade of bad planning and diesel fumes strung along the road. I stayed right where I was. At 7:52, Stuart pulled up in a black SUV, stepped out, looked at the lock, looked at the buses, looked toward my house, and then started walking over like a man, trying very hard not to jog. I met him at the fence line. He introduced himself, which was funny because we'd been neighboring properties for 6 years. But that's what people do when they feel authority sliding out from under them. They start over at the beginning and hope the tone carries them the rest of the way. He said there seemed to be a misunderstanding about the gate, and did I have a key? I told him there was no misunderstanding at all. The gate was locked because it sat on my private property, and I had no intention of letting 50 charter buses drive across my land without my permission. He switched to neighbor language then. Community, cooperation, goodwill. He said the event had been planned for months. Tickets had been sold. Families were waiting. He asked me as a neighbor to work with him. I told him as a neighbor he should have tried that 11 days earlier, or 11 weeks earlier, or any time before this exact moment, really. I reminded him he had used a photo of my land without my consent, advertised my road as part of his event. Contracted buses around a route he had no authority to promise, and never once thought it might be smart to ask the person who actually owned the ground beneath the tires. He didn't like hearing that. I didn't particularly care. There's a look people get when they realize charm isn't going to open the door. First they think you're kidding, then they think you're bluffing, then they get offended because they've run out of easier options. I'd seen all 3 looks before in my old line of work. Stuart wore each one in under 5 minutes. Finally he went still and asked flat out if there was anything he could say to make me open the gate. I told him no. Then I gave him Renata's number, said if he wanted to discuss it, he could do it through counsel, and walked back to my porch to finish my coffee. What happened over the next 4 hours was better than television and dumber than fiction. The buses sat there because the charter company had been given a route and a schedule, not a backup plan. Participants were arriving in their own cars and getting told there was a brief delay due to an access coordination issue, which is the kind of phrase people use when the truth sounds too embarrassing to say out loud. HOA volunteers were flapping around, engines were running, drivers were waiting for instructions nobody had. And Stuart was on his phone so much I half expected the thing to melt into his palm. At one point he apparently called the sheriff, maybe thinking law enforcement could order me to open my own gate on my own land for his failed tourist pageant. A deputy arrived around 9:15. I met him at the fence, showed him my deed on my phone, the installation photos, the property line info, and explained the whole thing in maybe 4 minutes. He listened, nodded, once walked back to Stuart, spoke to him briefly, then got in his cruiser and left. That was a beautiful little moment, I won't lie to you. The twist came around 10:30 when Renata pulled up in person. I hadn't asked her to. She just decided the situation had ripened enough that she wanted to be there herself. There are sights in life that settle your nerves instantly, and watching your lawyer step out of a car while the other guy is sweating in front of 50 trapped buses is one of them. She spoke to Stuart at the fence for maybe 12 minutes. I stayed close enough to hear, and I watched the man's face change color in stages. Renata laid it out clean. Trespass exposure, unauthorized commercial use of private property imagery, participant liability, potential claims from the charter company, refund pressure from ticket holders, bad paper trail, worse judgment. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Truth has a way of sounding loud when somebody's finally forced to hear it. Stuart made one last move then. He offered me money on the spot, a participation fee, like this was all still one inconvenient negotiation away from becoming his success story again. I told him we were long past that. The gate was staying closed. Today's event was dead. The only conversation left was the legal one. By noon, they had started turning the buses around, and let me tell you, 50 charter buses trying to unwind themselves on a 2-lane Montana road is exactly as graceful as it sounds. Slow, awkward, expensive, and very public. By 2 o'clock, the road was clear. The participants had drifted off. Refunds were being discussed, and Stuart's Autumn Heritage Tour had managed to visit no heritage and absolutely no valley worth bragging about. The legal part took a few months the way legal things do. I wasn't in a hurry. Time was working for me. Renata filed the demand package the Monday after the event, covering the unauthorized route, the photo used, the costs I'd incurred preparing for the day, and the broader damages. She also went after the HOA management side for signing off on a route nobody had bothered to verify. That to me was the part that said everything. It wasn't just arrogance. It was professional laziness dressed up as confidence. The settlement was thorough. The HOA paid my legal fees in full. They paid documented damages. They paid separately for the unauthorized use of the photo of my land. They gave a written acknowledgement that my road and gate were private property and that no access rights existed for residents, guests, or HOA events. That acknowledgement got recorded in Gallatin County, attached right there to the parcel records, which felt about as permanent and satisfying as ink can get. The charter company filed its own claim too. I wasn't part of that one, but from what I heard, they did just fine. Stuart didn't run for re-election when his term came up 8 months later. Officially, I heard he was stepping back to focus on other priorities. Sure. And raccoons step back from trash cans because they've had a spiritual awakening. Patricia, bless her, still calls me now and then with neighborhood gossip, and even she sounded almost impressed by the size of the mess he'd made. The new board president sent me a short professional letter after she took over saying they respected neighboring property rights and hoped for a better relationship going forward. I wrote back and said I appreciated that and I meant it. I've had no real trouble with them since. My gate is still there. Same heavy lock, same 2 keys. Every fall when the light hits the grass just right and the mountains look painted on the sky, I think about that morning. Not with anger anymore, more like recognition. Like seeing proof of something I already believed. Here's what that day taught me. A lot of people mistake access for entitlement, and they mistake silence for permission. They think if a line isn't defended, maybe it isn't real. But property boundaries, dignity, all of it works the same way. You'd better know what's yours, and you'd better be willing to stand there calmly when somebody else decides it ought to belong to them for an afternoon. 2,000 people bought tickets to see my land that autumn. None of them saw it. But every single person involved learned it was real, it was private, and it was not theirs to sell. So I'm curious what you think when somebody steamrolls a boundary that obvious is shutting the gate and letting them fail in public justice, or is it revenge with better paperwork? And if somebody has ever assumed they had access to something that belonged to you, tell me what happened. Because the way people react when they hear no usually tells you who they were all along.